Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. So thank you everybody for attending. This is the Serena Business Manager 11.1 beta kickoff meeting. You'll see the word Aurora used in various places. Aurora was the code name internally for this project prior to giving it the number of 11.1. So if you hear me saying Aurora, it's just 11.1. I've been saying Aurora for 9 months, so still getting used to saying 11.1, so forgive me if I switch back and forth. I'm David J. Easter. I'm the Director of Product Management for Serena Business Manager, Serena Service Manager, and the Process App Solutions you see up on Serena Central, and I'll be sharing beta kickoff with you today. So we're going to go over a little bit of the vision overview. In other words, this is kind of how we got up to this point in time, and a little bit of looking forward of what we're trying to accomplish as we move into the future. I will then cover the bulk of this will be me talking about what's expected in SBM 11.1. That'll be primarily some slides, and then I'll do a little bit of a demo a little later on some of the features, not all of them. You know, obviously it would take way too much time to cover everything, but I'll cover the big major features in the slides, and then demo a subset of those as well in the live demo off a live server. We'll talk a little bit about the beta information, starting and stopping date, etc., and then we'll leave some time open for Q&A. You guys are all muted at the moment. If you'd like to unmute and ask a question in the middle of the presentation, feel free to do so you don't forget what you were thinking about. We don't need to wait until the end to ask all the questions. Just unmute yourself, interrupt me, and ask your question, and we'll answer it as well as we can. If for some reason the folks on the phone can't answer the question, we'll take down the question and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, so looking at kind of the vision overview here. So if you look at SBM and look at the market space and competitors that are out there, we at Serena see that basically there's some table stakes for process applications, business process management platforms, and service management platforms that we think are just kind of the baseline to be able to have a solid product that you want to use for your highly regulated large enterprises. So the first thing that we see as necessary is a low-code, no-code operating environment. In other words, you don't have to learn a programming language to be able to create the process apps, create the workflow, create the logic that's necessary to be able to put in the processes. It's just a given that you need to have some sort of a higher level editing capability to be able to do that. So, we think that that's just, again, the baseline for what you need from a product at this level of need within the marketplace, low code, no code. Along with that, again, because you don't have a programming language there, you need some sort of graphical editor. So, we've had the graphical editor within SBM obviously from the beginning, and a lot of the competitors, a lot of the market space does have graphical editors, and we don't really see that as a differentiator as much as just necessary for the product. Now that said, we certainly feel we have a very strong graphical editor, so we differentiate ourselves in the value of that editor, but just having an editor, a graphical editor or not, really isn't a differentiator. Every product needs to recognize that it's in a heterogeneous environment. There's the best of suite from the 90s is long gone in history, so now you need to take a look at how your products work in a heterogeneous environment, and so what you look for in a product will be how well it integrates, and we see SBM has very strong integration capabilities, and when you take a look at other products and you're evaluating them, make sure that they have a strong integration options as well, or you'll probably leave them by the wayside. And then of course when you have a workflow business management process platform, really, the bread and butter of that is going to be the decision capability. If a process is being designed, it has to be able to make choices. When certain events occur or situations occur, or if-then statements, or one action occurs, then take another action, etc. And that all is just, again, a baseline for the product. So while all these are present in SBM and they are world-class capabilities within SBM, we see these as the table stakes for being in this market space and being able to continue to move forward. So looking at some of the differentiators that we see of SBM and what our customers have gone back for, what we're finding is that the majority of our customers see the value of SBM as the ability to be able to use the cliche of a single pane of glass. So they see SBM as an informational tool, a tool that allows organizations to become transparent, be able to be recognized for what they've done, recognized for what they're doing, be able to predict where they're going. And so, really the value of SBM comes in for being able to identify for an item what the status is, where it came from, where it's going, etc. So if you look at kind of the capabilities within SBM that really differentiate us, we're very strong in terms of notifications and reporting, especially on the reporting side of it. The built-in reporting capabilities of SBM really allow you to identify, where an item is in the process and what the current status is. Another differentiator of SBM is the history. We find our customers using that quite a bit to see how the item arrived at its current state, where it came from, what it changed from to get there. And then, of course, the auditing capability built in, always on from SBM, to be able to identify who changed the item, when they changed it, what they changed it from, what they changed it to, and all that is just always on for all fields within the product. So rather than being an afterthought, it's always there and always available. So, and again, these are all available in the product today. We're just taking a look at the strengths here of SBM. So looking at that and capitalizing on those strengths and reacting to what our customers are saying is that they really like those base capabilities, the strengths of SBM, but they want us to go farther. And so the vision for 2016 is to take advantage of this desire to have more visibility, more transparency, and be able to address the concerns of being able to see what's happening for status of items, not just within SBM, but across that heterogeneous environment. So, the first thing is, what's the status of all the items in a process, or even what's the status of items across multiple processes. So we have the need to be able to have a different visualization and be able to capitalize on being able to find out what the status is. There's a need for, what's the status of an item outside of my process. SBM integrates with a variety of different third-party applications, and there's a need to be able to reach out and find out what the status is, even if the item or the data doesn't reside within SBM. And then on the flip side, there's a need for external applications to be able to reach into SBM and either gather information or even make changes to the items that are in that process. So there's a request from customers, request from the market to be able to update the information within SBM from an outside application. So we'll talk about meeting these goals as we move through 2016. Much of it is in the next release. Some of it may be in the release later this year, but this is kind of what we're trying to focus on, is that transparency, that single pane of glass deliverable for 2016. So what's coming in SBM 11.1 specifically? So how are we going to fulfill on this vision that we just put forward? So the biggest new feature within SBM 11.1 is the Kanban board view. And for those of you that are familiar with Kanban, a lot of people have been looking forward to this. For those not familiar with Kanban, Kanban was invented by Toyota for their manufacturing process, and it was a way to be able to identify the velocity of their teams, be able to identify what items took longer to do, what items took shorter amount of time to do, and to make sure there wasn't a pileup in the conveyor belt when they were doing that manufacturing. So it was kind of a just-in-time manufacturing process. And they did it by setting up a whiteboard. They had their equivalent of Post-it notes, and you basically move the car along the conveyor belt. But if they saw, like the guys with tires were taking 5 minutes, but the guys with engines were taking 2 hours, and there was a pile up of tires, they could back off the velocity and be able to ensure that the folks that were doing tires either did another job or somehow modified their velocity so that the engine folks didn't get overwhelmed. And that same thing is now being applied for software and process management, where they've got an electronic Kanban board view, which allows you to kind of emulate electronically that whiteboard. Items are displayed as cards or Post-it notes, and they move along the process so that the columns representing status. So the interesting thing about the implementation that we're doing within SBM 11.1 is that everything is configurable. So it's not intended to be an application, not intended to be a built-in functionality that's linked to a specific use case, for example, Agile. It can be used for Agile, can be used for Lean, can be used for Scrum, but can also be used for process management, for project management. It can even be used for things like HR onboarding processes, sales campaign processes. I have a member of our own team that uses for marketing campaigns. It could be used for scheduling your church picnic. It can be used for really anything that you want to use it for. And it's that configurability that really makes it that way. The Kanban board view, it sits on top of data. So again, it's not a process or an application. What it is it's a view on top of data, the same way that the activity view or the calendar view or the backlog view, those are all views on top of data. And that's what makes it really configurable, is that you sit on top of an existing feed, and that feed can be either an internal feed or an external feed, and that's be able to reach out to other applications like Rally or Version 1 or Jira, and use, for example, a REST interface to gather information through that feed and collect the data within SBM and then display that data. When it's an external feed, that information is not stored within SBM. It's referenced from that external source. So you're not duplicating information, you're not syncing or copying information, you're just viewing the information that's out there in the external source. When I say it's configurable, what I mean by that is, you notice in the screenshot, There's columns that are within a Kanban board view, and here, the example is design, development, release. Under that design, as a developer of the Kanban board view, as the person that sets up the definition, I could choose the name for that, but as well I can pick which fields represent those columns, and then the statuses of those fields are what define which column the card is going to be in. I can also collapse those together so I can have multiple values within one column. So for example, under design, that could be a new status, it could be a deferred status, could be a returned status, could be a customer request status, could be any status that you want there, and you could have multiple statuses all within that one column. And that's to keep the number of columns down, because those that are knowledgeable about Kanban know you don't want to have 50 columns, you only want a few, and so this collapses them all together so you can track things more easily. You'll notice under the development column there's actually some subsections. There's coding and validate and done. We do allow you to go one level down in granularity, which is seen in many Kanban implementations. And we don't really want to go farther than that, so we let you go one level down, but that's as far as is allowed to be going. But this allows you to kind of follow even subsets or substatuses of what that's in that column. So within development, I've got the coding status, the validate status, and done status, and I can see where things are at that sub-level. Each of the cards can be completely configured, so you can choose what major field indicates the title of the card. Most of the time you probably use ID, but you could use something else. You can also control the fields that are displayed on the card. For example, most people would use summary, but you could use something else. There is the ability to set up an icon with a value of status, and you can control what field is representing that icon as well as the icons themselves. So again, that's that configurability. You'll notice on the right side of the screen there's a detail, and I'll show this in the demo, but when you click on the card, you're able to see the detail view, and that detail view, again, is completely configurable. You can choose which fields you want to be there, and what that is to be able to kind of get a quick view of what's happening within that particular item instead of having to go to the entire form and try and look through it there. Not only that, you'll notice you can actually select to do all fields, or even with the detail view, collapse it down into just required fields. So a very fast way to move through. And then the last configurable area is swim lanes. So swim lanes, if the status fields are the rows or the columns, then swim lanes are the rows, and those represent typically additional projects. But you could set up those swim lanes to be by engineer, by sprint, by whatever thing you have, whatever item you have a field that represents that kind of swim lane. So again, very, very configurable in that way. Obviously, the bread and butter of Kanban is to move things from one status to another, and so we completely support drag and drop. So if you pick up an item and drag it from one column to the next, it'll fire off the transition that would be appropriate for moving that from one status to the next. You'll get a pop-up window that asks you for the required fields that are necessary to transition, and then it'll fire off the back-end workflow transition. Again, it's because the Kanban board is a view, it's on top of that data. The drag and drop will execute the transition, but you could also have that transition fired off in other ways. It could be done through the detail view, could be done through opening up a form through another view, not just Kanban, could be done through an orchestration or workflow process, and as that data changes, the Kanban board will update. So again, it's not a process application, it's not its own application. Wherever that data changes, the Kanban board reflects it. And then finally, within Kanban, there's a concept of work in progress limits. That's that kind of just in time, making sure the velocity of the team is correct. So we do display the WIP limits at the top of each column. The Kanban board view doesn't have the ability to enforce that because, of course, we can't change the data from the view side. But you could have it within your process application to set up the velocity of your team and keep the maximum number from going into the queue. And the Kanban board view will certainly show you when you've exceeded that maximum. So I mentioned the external feeds. I'll give a little more detail on that. So the external feeds are read-only. Again, we're reading information from those external points. You can have multiple feeds. You can have feeds from both internal and external on the Kanban board view. And you can obviously point to a variety of different outside sources as well as inside of SBM. When you do have multiple feeds, you can even set them up so they're displayed at the same time. So as long as the statuses line up, in other words, if you map a closed status for the external view feed as well as the internal SBM feed, you can display everything within the same set of columns. So here we've got a screenshot of things in new status both from SBM as well as JIRA, and that also allows you to do details. If I click on a card that is for an external feed and I've got the fields in that feed, I can set those up to be displayed on the detail pane. So you can again use that single pane of glass to be able to view things in SBM or outside of SBM. Another improvement we did to a view is the backlog view. So we did a special interest group to find out who was using backlog view, and we found that not a lot of people know about backlog view or are using it. So we're hoping that the feedback we got will make this now much more usable, and more people will take advantage of backlog view. So for those that aren't familiar with it, backlog view allows you to take items from a feed. It by default drops them all into candidates, and then you can drag the candidates up to the accepted area. And while you're doing that, you can also set the priority of the items. So it's a way to be able to prioritize your backlog of items. In previous releases, that priority only existed in the backlog view, which made it kind of difficult for folks to know what the priority of items was. In this release, we are changing it so that that priority can be shared into other places within workflows. So if I set the priority within a backlog view, I can query that priority from another source. The biggest change we made was about the control of display. So previously in 11.0 and before, the backlog view only could use system fields for columns. So in this release, we're now allowing customers to completely configure that. You can choose any column that you want, any field you want to be in that column, and be able to control it in that way. And the last change we made is that there was a request to be able to track, when a backlog was accepted or moved out of a accepted queue and back into the candidates queue. And that's for situations, where you may have a sprint. You may decide that you can do 10 items in that sprint, but as you get halfway through, you realize you can't finish all of them, and so you may defer them to the next sprint. So you pull them out of one backlog, put them in another. It'll now track that information that something was removed. Or if you're running ahead of schedule and you can actually put things in, or you have a customer request or some sort of priority request that comes in from your customer source, and that gets added to the backlog, you can also track that as well. So you can see there on the bottom right of the screen, pluses and minuses. Plus show that something was added since the backlog was created, and the minus means it was removed. And we keep track of something back and forth. So you can see that some of them have 2 pluses and 2 minuses. That's because something was put in, removed, put in, removed. And so it keeps track of all that history as it's moving forward. Another big update, for being able to be a good citizen of a heterogeneous environment is that we're updating the REST interface. For those that remember, in 11.0, we worked very hard to make sure that the outbound REST interface, in other words, reaching out to other applications and drawing information in, was very solid. And so this is kind of the other half of that story, where other applications want to reach into SBM and perform standard CRUD operations. So that's create, read, update, and delete. And we've updated the REST interface, the JSON interface, to be able to allow for that. Now, it's the same kind of interface that we've been using for our own solutions, but we never really documented it, never made that public information. So what we've done in this release is put a polish on it, made sure that it's solid for use for our customers. We'll be documenting it and making that available to our customers. So that should complete the basic story for the REST interface, outbound and inbound. Obviously, it's a journey, not a destination, so we'll be continuing to improve it, but at least it does both halves of the story. The SBM Mobile Client, so for those that were part of the SRC Mobile Client demo or have tried out the hosted server that we have, the SRC Mobile Client was kind of a proof of concept. It was our first productized use of the new mobile client framework that we developed. And what we're doing in the 11.1 time frame is taking that framework and making it available for all mobile applications that are built on SBM. So what we've done is that we can go into Composer. So we had to make some changes to Composer as well, which is why I had to wait for the SBM 11.1 release. But you can go into Composer, look at your process applications, and you can choose from those process applications which one you want to enable on the mobile client. There are certain times when a process application is not appropriate for the mobile client, so you may want to not have it be mobile, and there's times when it is appropriate, so you would check that. Once you've selected that an application is going to be on the mobile client, you can also have a choice to display or not display many of the fields. There may be fields that are not appropriate for the mobile client, and so you can turn those off. And then as well, we do support the form actions. So the form actions that are within the process application seen on the browser client will also work on the mobile app, and you can actually tune those form actions so that they are specific for the mobile client, so that you can have a different user experience on the mobile client than on your browser. So those are all available for you from the Composer. Because of the Composer changes, this SBM Mobile Client will work only with this version of SBM and forward, but we really see it as a huge step forward in the ability to be able to take your applications and make them mobile. Now I'll make a comment about the usability of the mobile app. So it's tuned and designed for smartphones. So basically the smaller real estate you get on a smartphone. For folks that are using phablets or tablets or laptops and such, we really expect them to use the browser, and so the larger real estate will be browser-based. It's not to say you can't use a mobile app on something like an iPad, but it's not going to be specifically tuned for the iPad. It'll be more tuned for iPhone or Android devices. In this beta, we're going to start off with the Android client, and we'll put in instructions on how to download the Android client during the beta on the beta forum that we'll be creating. iOS is not yet available as a mobile app. We expect that to be available in the next refresh. In this particular beta, the mobile client will be available to folks that have installed SBM locally. We are working on a hosted beta server that will allow you to connect the mobile app to our server. It's not quite yet available. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so we'll get that up and running. But the code is all there for folks that want to be able to do this in their own environment. So you can download the Android client, load up the server in your test environment, and go ahead and play with it. Another change that we made was the ability to be able to take advantage of better navigation and better management of views within SBM. So I'll give you some examples for that. So the first one we took on was the application launch. So for those that are using the product currently, you know that the only way to really launch an application is to open up the My Applications, favorite an application, and then you can launch the application, which of course means you have to give up one of the things you've already favorited to be able to add the one you want to launch, which was not the best user experience. So what we've done in this release is we've changed the My Applications from a paged interface to a pull-down list interface, so you can scroll down through all the applications that are available. And then you can also click on any application and launch it without making it a favorite. So if I have an application I don't use very often, but I still need to launch, I can pull down in a list of applications, launch that application, and be able to launch it without giving up some of the favorites that are up there. Of course, you can still favorite the ones that you want, so that's available from the pull-down list. But we feel this will be much easier to be able to launch for customers that have a lot of different applications. In the same way, we've improved the view management. The screenshot really isn't going to do it justice, so I'll show you this during the demo because there's a lot of movement involved. But basically, if you have ever heard of somebody in development or support reviewed of the microwave icon, the user experience in previous releases was you had to click on a manage view icon, then you had to click which area of views you wanted to edit or modify. It would kind of yank you out of the experience. You would do what you wanted to do, then you have to find back into the views you wanted to see. And it was all kind of difficult, multiple clicks to be able to do things. So in this release, we've completely eliminated the Manage Views icon, and so the way you get to managing the views is just click on the view area that you want to be able to edit, add to, or modify. So if you wanted to modify dashboards, click on the dashboards on the left-hand side. If you want to modify reports, click on the reports on the left-hand side, etc. So much easier, much more intuitive to get to the managing area. Once you're managing, you've brought up a list of activity views or a list of reports, and you want to add those to your favorites, you can of course click on the star as you can today. But in addition, you can pick up the item, drag and drop it over to the left side. You can drop it anywhere within that, and it'll automatically make it a favorite. In addition, the drag and drop capability allows you to move and reorder items either within a particular area. For example, within dashboards, I might want to move my dashboards up and down, or my reports, I want to move them to the top or bottom. In addition, you can also move areas, so I can actually click and move backlog, for example, to the top of my left side navigation if I do that all the time, or take activities and move it to the bottom because I don't use it very often. So you can move items within an area, and then you can now move areas as well, and I'll show you that during the demo. The last part of the user experience that we took on was searching. So searching, very powerful within SBM today. We wanted to make it even more so. So the first thing you'll notice is on the left side, we've introduced design configurable facets. And this concept is the same as you would encounter if you were to, say, go to Walmart site or an Amazon site or Home Depot site. Let's say you're looking to buy a camera from Amazon. And once you've selected the keyword of cameras, then you may want to break that down by price, you may want to break it down by brand, you may want to break it down by lens power. And so you want these additional facets that are specific for cameras and don't appear until you've actually selected cameras as a keyword and said you want to go look for something else in terms of the different definition of that camera. So we're doing the same thing here with an SBM. So you can define facets based on fields, put those into the search definitions, and so as you're searching, you can then click on the left-hand side and be able to drill down into those configurable facets. So in this example, for example, I've typed in color, and then I clicked on change request management, and then now I have a request type of planned or unplanned. That's not a system field. That's something that was added, obviously, by the designer, and I can use that field for facets. We've also added in sorting capability. So right now the sorting is by relevance, how much it's matched the search criteria. And what we've done is we've allowed you to sort by system fields. So you can sort by submitted by, sort by date submitted, sort by all those information that are in there in system fields. So that's completely available as well. For either the facets or the sorting, we now store those filters and store those sorting definitions for every keyword that you put in. So if I set up filters and I'm searching and I change my keyword in the current product, it'll erase all the filters and make you start over. In 11.1, we retain that, so it'll keep those filters in place until you clear them. So if I put in color and I've selected plan from change management and I get a list, I go, no, I want to do error. I can type error as a keyword. It'll retain those filters and bring up the results from the same filter set. The last change that we made within the search area is ID and keyword. This is brought over from the Workspace Classic UI. So you can now search just for ID, and this will allow you to find something just by ID rather than doing a search through things like description and summary and so forth. So if I type in, say, asterisk 185, I'll show you, it'll bring up only those IDs that match 185. It will not match the keyword 185 in summaries, descriptions, notes fields, anywhere within any field, it'll just match the ID. So a very fast way to be able to look up by ID. Another change that we've made is device responsive and modern forms. So current forms work very well, but people have been asking us to take advantage of some of the capabilities within HTML5 that have been developed over the years. And so we're introducing more modern forms. Certainly the forms you have will continue to work. This is not changing the underlying abilities of the forms you have. But if you want to take advantage of the more modern forms, you can start to convert your existing applications or any new applications you build into these modern forms. So the list of capabilities is quite extensive. I can't go into all of them, but I'll give you the highlights here. So the first big thing is modifying and adjusting the layout based on the device. So we recognize that folks are using, as I mentioned, tablets, laptops, single monitors, dual monitors, even up to full screen knock screens. And we want to make sure the layout is appropriate for the kind of device you're on. And so it'll modify the layout based on that. So it'll know what kind of device you're on and then be able to modify that layout. Again, that's for browsers. You can see there in the screenshot, in the middle screenshot there, highlighted in red, is persistent controls no matter where you scroll. So kind of like freezing rows within Excel, you can scroll up and down within a form, but if you want to keep buttons that are available, you can keep those at the top. And that's great for, sometimes you have to scroll down to find information way down at the bottom of the form, and rather than having to scroll all the way back up and trying to remember which button to press, that button will stay up there. We've added a sidebar allowing for very important fields, so if you have a field that always needs to be present, even if you're scrolling up and down the screen, you can put that field off to the side on the left. Or if there's a particular widget you want to be persistent on that left side, you can do that as well. So that sidebar now allows for some specific fields that you want to always present or widgets. We had a request that sometimes the required fields are hidden down there in tabs and made it difficult to find. So in this release, we'll now highlight which tabs have required fields in them so you can know to navigate to those tabs to be able to find those required fields. Or we've also introduced a required field navigation. So similar to the find capability within Word or other browsers, you can use the next capability of this navigation. It'll move you automatically to each required field. You can enter something in that field and hit next, move on to the next one and so forth, and work your way through all the required fields no matter where they are on the form. So it's a very fast way to be able to fill out all the required fields before finishing a transition or an update. And of course down there at the bottom we do have the banner, header and footer banner where you can do customization of the logos and such. That's actually currently available, but we've made it a little bit easier to be able to get to those. And then last but not least, we did update the reporting library, and this gave us access to a variety of new graph types. So in addition to all the report types that were there before, we now have heat maps. That's the upper left-hand one. We have what's called donut, which is kind of a ring graph. And then we have a radar graph, or what sometimes people refer to as a spider graph. So all three of those are now available in addition to the existing types primarily used in distribution reports, but the various graphs that we have there can be used. And as you're creating the report and you select the type, you'll have additional options within that pull-down. The other update that we've done to the reporting library is we introduced advanced reporting in 11.0, and so you can create some very complex, very deep reports, but there were some that customers were creating all the time, and so we've taken some input from Serena Central in the Ideas section and made some of those complex reports out of the box. So, for example, there's now a report for what notifications am I signed up for, or what items am I following as reports, and so you can now get a report on those. Okay, I'll cover a little bit about the beta information, and then I'll launch into the demo. So just about the beta information, so it starts today. For folks that are in Asia Pacific, it started yesterday. So it'll run for quite some time. It tentatively ends around July 28th. That's what we're aiming for GA for 11.1. The way to participate in this beta program is to sign the beta agreement. I posted that up on Serena Central in the original invite for this kickoff. But if for some reason you can't find that, just shoot me an email and I'll forward it to you. It's a Word document, so you can fill out the first page of your company name and your location, and then on the last page, it's only 2 pages, but the second page, you can fill out your name, or your title, or your printed name, the date, etc., and then go ahead and print it out on a printer, sign it, and then scan it and PDF it back to me. What I'll do is I'll countersign it and send it off to you, and then you'll be part of the beta program. Once you're part of the program, you'll be added to the beta forum, and the forum is going to be the place where the download information for the beta software is going to be. In addition, that's where we'll post various tips and tricks, any gotchas that we found, so things to watch out for, or if there's any workarounds for known defects that'll be there before the next beta refresh, we'll post them there. We expect to have 2 beta refreshes during this beta, perhaps more depending on what happens, but at least 2. And in this release, you're also going to be able to upgrade between beta releases. So from beta 1 to beta 2, you'll now be able to upgrade without having to reinstall. So that's a change that's happening as well. You can even go all the way to GA, although we wouldn't recommend it. The code will allow for that. So you can go from your beta 2 or beta 3 to GA. But again, we wouldn't recommend that because you've probably done some things in your beta in terms of data and such, so it'd be best to do a full refresh installation for GA. The beta forum is also going to be a place where you provide feedback, ask questions. This is a place to go, if you have found a defect or you want to be able to communicate with support. We won't encourage you to call the support number. We'll encourage you to use the forums, and support will be watching that like a hawk. If for some reason they do need to open up a case, they certainly will, and will contact you directly with a case number. But please start with the beta forums when you have questions or support issues. Okay, so before I launch in the demo, any questions on the slides that I presented? Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay, then we'll get right into the demo then. So this is Work Center. Obviously, it looks pretty much the same as it did, but you can see there's the Kanban boards that are here. I've got, in this case, I can show you about the Manage Views capability. So here I've clicked on Kanban views, and this is be able to bring up the management of these views. In this case, I've got 2 that are already favorited. You can see the stars that are here. I can click on that star to get rid of it, or I can go over here and click on a star to add it, just like before. But new is the ability to be able to drag and drop. So I can take this change request, drop it in. And the other thing about the Manage Views is we've decided to make sure that everything is mirrored. So if I take an action to add something, I can do the same action to remove it. So in this case, if I wanted to get rid of this, I can just click it and drag it off into space, and it removes it from that left side navigation. So I can move all these in here. So if you take a look at the Kanban board views, and so here I've got a representation of multiple swim lanes. In this demo that I've got here, I used not projects as the field, but I actually used severity as the field. You'll see here that I've got the multiple columns. This contains various things. You can see the whip limit. Here I've exceeded my whip limit. That's why it's in red. I can collapse columns. So again, it's completely configurable. So when I collapse a column, it actually collapses it, and I can control what the small word is that's used during the collapsing. So, for example, if I collapse the word candidates, it'll actually send it down and become CAND. Looks like the WebEx is delaying a little bit here, so you can't see it yet. but all the changes that I make, I have full control over what it says when it collapses those columns. I can also collapse the swim lanes to be able to see more of what's going on. There we go, catching up. So you can see here I've collapsed it. I can have CAND as the shortened name for candidate and done for the shortened name for complete. I can also collapse down the swim lanes to be able to see what's going on there. As I collapse these swim lanes, I'm going to find that one of these is actually a swim lane that's been populated by JIRA. So in JIRA, I've got some severities that aren't there, but I can open up this item, be able to see the detailed view within the JIRA ticket. So again, that's a place to show that I have both SBM information as well as JIRA information. So I go to incident management. This is where drag and drop is obviously the way you do Kanban. If I'm dragging something, it grays out for a place that I can't drop it, but eventually I get to a point where I can drop it. Once I drop it in here, it'll bring up that pop-up window that lets you type in what's needed for the transition. Some of these required fields were already filled out, but one of them was not. I can also collapse this down and find only the required fields, and so I can see that the required field that's needed here is to put somebody into support, say OK, and that moves it into the technicians column. I can also move things backwards as well. Obviously, I can bring up the detail view and do the same thing, or if I click on an item, I can bring up the standard form, be able to change things within here in terms of transitions, and when I make those changes, they'll be reflected in the Kanban board view. So it's very powerful in terms of configuration, drag and drop capabilities within Kanban. Show you quickly on the settings side of it. And again, I apologize, it looks like Webex is delaying a little bit. So here I've got a feed, which is incident management. If I had that other view that was up that had multiple data, I'd have two feeds, one from SBM, one from JIRA. Here's where I can set up the columns. In this case, I've got an example where I've got two different statuses that are part of the mapped values for state. Here I've got the swim lanes. I'm using project for my swim lanes. I can define what's on the card. I can define what is in the item detail. So I can have all these different fields in the item detail. And of course, obviously, I can then save that. So very configurable within the Kanban board view. Moving on to backlogs. So as I mentioned, there's the backlog view. Backlog view allows me to be able to view the things that are in my backlog queue and be able to move things up from candidates over to accepted. So here in this example is a default. I've already moved some items up into the accepted area. I'll show you the history. So here's the history. So again, here I've got pluses and minuses. If I find an item that's in my backlog list, let's take, for example, 082. So everybody remember that number, 082. I'm going to move that back down into candidates. And now when I check the history, you'll see that 082 now has a minus on it to show that it has been removed from the backlog. And if I went back to backlog list and put it back, obviously it would show again. I can scroll down here. Oops, didn't drag that correctly. Anyway, you get the idea. You're able to drag it from the bottom, bring it up the top, and the history will be recorded. If I want to be able to see additional configurable columns, what I can do is just go back to backlogs and edit this particular backlog. You'll see here there's now a tab for columns. Scroll down a bit here so you can see it. So I may want to add, for example, percentage done. And I may want to add team lead. Move those up the stack a little bit so I can see them better. So now there'll be priority item ID, then the title, then percentage complete and team lead. I'll save that. Now when I go back and I launch my backlog view, we can see now that in the columns there's a percentage as well as team lead. And of course I can sort on those columns as well, so I can see which ones are done and have those scroll down and see what's going on, or I could sort by team lead. So again, very configurable within the backlog view to be able to make those changes and make it even more usable than it is today. I'll go over to the search. I go in the search area. Again, as I mentioned, if I put in keywords, first I'll have all the items that match that particular non-filtered. You can see here on the left-hand side, I've got the filtering area. At this point, I've had no select filter, so what I could do is I could select active apply that filter now. You can see I have a smaller set of results. And then if I go down here and check on change request management, apply that filter, I've got less results, as well as I've got a new configurable request type at the bottom here. So now I can do unplanned, click on unplanned, apply that filter, and now I've only got the one result. As I mentioned, if I put in the keywords, the filters are still going. I could turn off the filters to see if I could find other things here. I had to turn off everything to be able to get to error, but you can see that it kept the filters. So inactive active is still there, even though I've changed the keyword. I can sort by all these system fields, so I can do it by last modified date, and it'll automatically update to sort by last modified date. I can do that in reverse order. And the last thing is I mentioned I can go in here and search for a field, so I could do 185, and it'll find only the ID that matches that 185. I can use wildcards within keyword as well, just as you can today, but it's really convenient to be able to find IDs. Just remembering the last few digits or something, you can find it very quickly. I'll show you real quick on the reports. So I have actually in my reports an example of the donut. There's a live version of the donut graph that's there. But if I did want to modify that, I'll show you real quick. Or maybe not. Okay, I've got a slight bug in bringing up markers. Sometimes the system requires a refresh to be able to see things. So just if you do encounter this in beta and you want to do your browser, just reload your browser. Okay, so I'm going to edit this, and during the build report, here on report style, I now have more items to be able to do it. So I could do a heat map, preview that. That's what heat map looks like. Or I can go in and do that that radar or spider diagram, as some people call it. And there's what the spider diagram looks like. So those are the major things we wanted to share with you today. Obviously, there's more to the release, but that's it for the demo. So we'll now open it up for any additional questions that came in, either about the demo or about any slides or about the beta program. Just remember, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your questions. Okay, if there's no questions, then well, thank you for joining us today on this beta kickoff. Again, go to the Serena Central, grab the beta agreement, fill that out, send it off to me, and we'll get you part of the beta program. And we really look forward to your participation in the beta process. So thank you all again.